Super excited about this latest acquisition, a 2007 6-speed 997 turbo with about 40 plus thousand miles on it. And last night I completed the partial suspension upgrade, which included the Eibach springs and new struts and shocks. And also I added adjustable upper control arm and the lower links as well. And then I also updated or upgraded the engine mounts to the RSS engine mounts. And I believe the adjustable control arm or upper control arm and end link are by Torque Solutions. So anyway, many more items to check off the list of to do on the vehicle, but that was the first one. I wanted to do a semi or at least a full suspension refresh, which I'm going to be completing once I get some additional parts, the lower control arms, etc. There was nothing wrong with the suspension beforehand, but I wanted to basically sort of start from scratch, or at least start fresh, because it's my car now. But yeah, this is it. More things to come. Okay, the first part of our project is removing the old struts and shocks, and then also adding some lowering springs. But yeah, this is it's fairly straightforward. It's not overly difficult, other than some tricky angles to get it out. But there's only a few items that you need to remove or loosen. So let's start with something fairly simple, is removing this bracket. Obviously pop this bad boy out and remove the sensors. I think this is the ABS and also the brake sensor. And then after you do that, you want to go ahead and loosen the sway bar end link bolt. You can remove the top. You don't have to remove the entire thing. Just remove the top unless you're replacing the whole thing. And then what you want to do is you want to loosen the lower control arm bolt here, which is here. And then obviously have an open end wrench to hold it over here, but you can get a ratchet in there. And I'll tell you the specific size when I get to those particular items. And then you want to loosen the nut here. That's for the strut that holds it in place. This is it right here. And then the two bolts that hold the caliper in place, they're hex keys or Allen wrenches. And I'll give you guys the size in a minute as well. My 09 actually has Torx as opposed to Allen wrenches. And then you need to remove the wheel axle nut, which is pretty tough. If you have a impact gun, definitely use it. It's going to be really tough to take off with a breaker bar. It's about 340 foot-pound, so it's going to be really tough. But anyway, that's pretty much all you need to take off. Oh, in addition to the 13 millimeter 3 bolts here, or 3 nuts rather. And then obviously unhook the PASM wire. All right, so I'm slowly taking off this bracket here, but also go ahead and remove the brake cable or brake line from the bracket as well. It'll make it a lot easier. And like I said, there's a 10 millimeter back here you want to remove. It's a screw, whereas the front right here is a nut. Okay, so what I did was remove the ABS sensor and the brake pad sensor as well, disconnected that, and then I removed the brake line from the bracket as well, so that way it gives me a lot more room to mess around with this bracket. And then I disconnected the PASM wire for this Bilstein aftermarket suspension. If you're going with stock, you won't have this. It's actually up here in this area for the stock, but because this is Bilstein, it's right here. Anyway, don't move this too much because it's actually connected to this metal brake line right down here. There it is. This right here. This metal brake line connects to the caliper, so you got to loosen the caliper. Then this entire area will be able to push back. Obviously, I'm supporting it with the jack stand, and also I have a jack stand down there just for safety reasons as well. All right, so I'm removing the sway bar end link now, and it is a 16 millimeter because if I don't remove or loosen and swing this out of the way, the bracket hangs on and it won't let me properly place the brake caliper. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. There's an impact gun here. There it is. I love the impact gun here. Simple as that. So that's a 16 millimeter. And then I'm gonna swing it out of the way. Do that with two hands. I'll be right back. All right, now that the sway bar end link is out of the way, I just ended up folding it down here, as you can see. Next is to remove the bolt and nut that clamps the strut in place, and it is 18 millimeter on this end and 16 millimeter on this end. All right, now that the nut's off, I'm pulling the bolt through, and there you go. So now it is loose, as you can see. All right. So the next thing is to loosen the lower control arm knuckle over there, and then I'm gonna hit the impact gun on this to loosen this up, and let's see if I can push this back. I'm probably gonna have to hammer it with something. I have an old bolt that I typically use to hammer it out, so I'll use this to push it out, you know, without trying to, well, hopefully it won't strip the threads here, but should be okay. So as you can see, I'm using a 16 millimeter open end wrench to hold it in place, and then I got the 1/2 inch. Man, this is tough, but it should drop. There it is. It dropped slightly, as you can see. There it is. So that's all you have to do is just kind of loosen it a little bit, and it'll drop. So the next thing will be to remove this, and then the 3 bolts, and this entire thing will drop down. And then I'll have to push it down a little bit, and then swing it out. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the 3 screws up here, and it is fairly easy. It should be no more than 25 foot-pound, I believe. So it should be fairly easy to take this off. So, get these 3 off here. I was going to mark these as when I put it back. I was going to basically make sure all these line up, but I need an alignment anyway, so I'm not too concerned about making sure that these nuts line up properly where they were previously. Okay, so I have my 32 millimeter socket, and then I'm going to use the impact gun here. Oops. So I'm going to hold this in place. All right, she's out. Yeah, that's pretty tough. So now just got to push this in. So I'm going to hammer in the bolt here. If you have a brass hammer, definitely use that. But since I don't have one, I'm going to go old school. All right, so I'm going old school. Woohoo! It should still be able to screw in. Wow, that's at a weird angle, so it's not gonna let me. Okay, so it's out. I had to coerce it a little bit. I had to pretty much pull this back slightly, and then there was barely a little bit left of the shaft here inside the hub here, and I ended up stepping on this gently, and it popped out. But one thing you should do, if you have, put another jack down here to kind of support this entire arm. I just don't like it hanging down there like that loosely, but I don't think it's going to hurt anything. But again, just a good idea to just kind of have something support under there. But anyway, this down here. Then this should come up fairly easily. Just loosen a little bit. There it is. Came out. What I like to do is I like to reinsert the axle into the hub and I put the screw back on, so that way it just doesn't hang there. All right, so I compressed the springs. Not a whole lot of compression required. Saved everyone a little trouble of watching me painfully put these on. But anyway, there's not a whole lot of compression on these, so all I needed was just a little bit, so that way when I do use the impact gun on this bad boy, should come off fairly easily. One thing I do want to note is that for the stock, the fronts use this special tool, and it is a 21 millimeter. Okay, and you can only do it a few times, and then you have to unravel the cable and then do it again, unravel the cable. Take your time, otherwise that cable will whip around, and if you're reusing your stock strut, then you don't want to damage that cable. Okay, so I had one minor setback, and it was this kept spinning because I think there was a little bit of rust on here, even though I hit it with a little bit of a WD-40. It spun with the impact gun. So what I ended up doing was taking an old basketball, a rubber basketball that one of my boys don't use anymore. I slid it under here, and then I used this to slightly put a little pressure to hold the shaft, and it came off easily. Obviously I did this so I won't damage the shaft itself. As you can see here, everything's fine. Just a little bit of grease here, but point is, you want to be able to get something to kind of hold it in place if you're going to use the impact gun. If not, obviously it has Allen wrench here for you to hold as you're turning, but I didn't want to go through all that. I just basically wanted to use the impact gun, make it quicker. All right, everything's back, and I decided to go with OE struts, only because I have the Bilstein B6 on the white car, 09 that is, and I figure I'll be driving this one a little bit more than the white one, so I figured I'll go back to OE, make it a little bit less firm. But anyway, make sure you follow the instructions on the Bilstein, how it has that little mini ring down here, and it actually has flat and the concave side, or grooved, and the groove side goes down. Then obviously the disc here, you can see is facing down, and then the strut plate, and then obviously the other washer that faces up, and then the nut. But anyway, all right, the Eibach springs are in, and yeah, I'm gonna put this back. So one of the tricks to get the shaft here back into the hub is that you basically have to fold this out, obviously line the strut up with the groove here, and there's a stop here, so don't worry about that, it just automatically stops. And use a floor jack to lift the hub up slightly, because this comes in at a weird angle like this. As you lift up the jack, it's easier for it to slide in. You'll be able to get about a couple inches inside here, the hub, maybe an inch and a half or so. And what you have to do is, as you're jacking this up, this top part of the strut here ends up hitting this top piece here, and allow it to compress. Not a big deal. As long as you're not pinching the cable here, you should be good. And as that's compressing a little bit, sort of maneuver this back and forth, and then come in here, try to pull this towards you a little bit, and then also maybe try to twist it a little bit. So that way you'll hit the grooves here, and then it should pop out just like that. And then once it does, obviously put this on to hold it in place, and then use the floor jack to definitely lift this up more, so that way it aligns up with the holes here. One thing to note is that I forgot to mention, one, make sure you put tape up here so you don't scratch the paint. And then the other piece is that on top of here, there's an arrow that basically points this way. So it needs to be on the outside, and basically needs to be on the outside and pointing in. One trick I did is put a line here, and then I can see it from inside the car, or at least in the wheel well, knowing that I'm facing the correct direction. So I basically got it through, and if you forget to put a line on the plate up here, you can actually look through here with a flashlight, and you can see the arrow on this piece as you're trying to move it up. And if the arrow is pointing towards the front of the car, you're good. All right, now it's time to put everything back. So one thing that I want to mention also is you should definitely try to jack the hub up to where it's leveled, because when you tighten the knuckle here for the control arm, you want to make sure that the bushing is leveled, so that way if it's low, what ends up happening is that it'll end up putting a lot of load on that knuckle and that bushing, and it will definitely prematurely wear it out, and you'll probably have to replace the entire thing again, or the control arm. So anyway, you want to make sure you jack it up where it's actually leveled, and then you can tighten it. But anyway, I'm gonna put everything back together now. All right, so I leveled the control arm, and then I tightened the nut there. Again, it's 18 millimeter, and on the other side over here is 16 millimeter. So now it's time to tighten the screw and put the bolt on for the shock or strut. All right, so the strut bolt is in, tightened. I did not use the impact gun, only because that would over tighten the nut and probably would have stripped it. And now I'm putting in the sway bar link there. All right, so everything's pretty much back in. I'm going to double check to make sure I tighten all the bolts, and that is tight. The nut and screw to the strut is tight. The 3 nuts up here are tight, hand tight to about 25 pounds, I believe. And then the end link bolt or nut is tight, and then obviously the axle nut is tight as well. And I did not attach these just yet, only because I'm going to change the brakes, and that I believe requires me to take off the caliper at some point to compress the pistons. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that before I tighten everything up and do a double check. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Took me about an hour or so to pretty much, from taking the strut out to compressing it with the spring compressor, and then switching out to the new strut. All right, brakes are done, new pads are in, the bracket is tightened, and everything else is tightened up, and now I just need to plug in the PASM wire, which is right here. I'll make sure it goes under here and connect it properly, and then I'll remove the old PASM wire from the Bilstein. So in order to remove the rear shocks, the first thing you need to do is remove the Bose subwoofer system in the car here. And it's actually fairly easy. You only need 3 tools. The first one is a Torx T27. That's to loosen the screws that's behind here. And then you need an Allen wrench as well. And this is a size HW6 or 6 to remove the I guess this is called a locking bolt for the back seat, but it's just a fairly easy process. First you remove this, it's just clipped on. I just put this back here on this side as well, and then if you see down here, there's the Torx. So it's a fairly long screw, and basically just remove that because that's what holds the subwoofer in place. One thing I want to note as you're removing the bracket is make sure that you have the Allen key in snug, because you can strip this bracket and it's going to be very difficult to take off if it does strip. All right, so I got both brackets off, obviously, but one thing I also want to point out is the screws that are holding the subwoofer in place. They're really long, so be patient as you're taking it out. So once that's out, you can just basically pull up here, and you notice the subwoofer system slides out fairly easily. But just be careful, because there's actually a cable up here that you need to disconnect. So here's the cable for the subwoofer, and you can easily remove it by pinching this clip on this side and on the opposite side as well. So they're on both sides, and just kind of wiggle it back and forth, and you should be able to pull it off. Once you have the subwoofer out, you'll have to remove this cover to give you access to the 2 screws or bolts that hold the bracket in place. All right, to remove this cover, just dig your hand in here. It's actually pretty firm. Dig your hand in here and just start pulling away. And from the sides here, you should be able to pull it out fairly easily. There you go. So that's it. So once you have that removed, go ahead and take out these 2 screws. I'm sorry, these 2 little nuts here, and then back here. That'll remove this bracket on both sides, one over there obviously, and that'll give you access to remove this properly, and then you'll have full access to the 3 nuts that are actually holding down or attached to the strut or the shock tower. Okay, so these are actually 10mm nuts, and just be careful as you're loosening them, so that way you don't drop them, because they're going to be a pain to find. What I like to do with this last one is that once it's loose, I carry the bracket up with the screw, with the nut. So that way I don't drop it.
like that. That way I have the nut with me. So then this gives you access to this piece. As you can see, it's pretty long, so you just can't pull it out without removing the bracket. Once you have that off, then you'll have access to the 3 nuts for the strut tower. Just peel these bad boys back. Or if you don't want to, that's perfectly fine as well, but I'm okay with pulling it back. Moving it out of the way, or just take it out altogether. Also, you notice that this is the PASM here. And once you remove the other insulation pieces, it's right down here. You're gonna have to cut this off and then disconnect it right there. So if you notice, I cut off the zip tie that basically held the PASM cable in place, and here it is. So just like the front PASM, you just got to loosen it by sticking in there, and then you pull it apart. It's just this little tab you need to lift up. And you just need to do the same thing for the other side. Now that I have all the trim off and disconnected the PASM wires, it's time to use my 15mm socket to remove the nuts on both sides. So next step is to drop the sway bar, the rear sway bar that is, and it's held up by 2 brackets, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side, and there's 2 screws holding it up, and I believe they're 13mm. And once you remove both of these brackets, then the sway bar should be able to swing down. And since I'm in here to replace not only the strut and springs, I decided to order the rear toe link, adjustable that is, and then also the camber control arms as well, which is, these are commonly known as the dog bones, I believe. And then I also plan to replace the engine mounts as well. But yeah, so that's all right. So this is the last screw, and then the sway bar drops. And next is to remove that screw for the nut for the end link. You want to remove this because it'll swing out of the way, so that way when you slide the shock that direction, it'll come out easier. Might replace those as well. All right, so next you want to loosen the knuckle here, or the lower control arm, just like we did the front one, where it'll just allow the suspension to drop slightly. All right, so next is to remove the shock, and you'll need an 18mm on the right side and a 16mm on the left side. Right. The suspension didn't drop enough, so I'm unable to take this bolt out. So the next thing you want to do is pretty much remove these bolts, and that should allow you to swing the I guess the hub or the carrier out of the way, and gives you enough room to remove that bolt. And since I'm replacing these anyway, I'm going to take them off regardless. Alright, so by taking this out, I noticed that it did drop slightly, and it's going to drop a lot more once I remove the bolt here. But I'm going to do it for both sides, and I'm going to do these as well and just remove them entirely. But like I said, if you drop the lower control arm, that piece down there, and the suspension doesn't drop enough for you to remove that bolt, you have to remove these dog bones, or I think they call them camber control arms or something to that effect. Okay, so I got the nuts off, but now it's trying to pull the screw through and lower the bolts rather, and they tend to be stuck a little bit, so you just either wiggle it, or if you have a floor jack it up a little bit, take the tension off. Do it slowly, obviously. And they should come out really easily. Here we go. Same thing with this bad boy down here. Now that you see the dog bones are out, all I have to do is pull the shot forward and give it a little bit of a wiggle, and it should be able to come out fairly easily. There it is. And there it is. So I'll take care of that in a minute, but I'm gonna go ahead and remove these, and then also the toe link here as well, since I'm replacing it. But if you are working on your car and you're not replacing this and you need to make room for this bolt to come out, definitely use or loosen the dog bones. Don't loosen the toe link. Again, 16 millimeter ratchet and 18 millimeter nut. All right. Just so I don't lose this. Before I remove the toe link here, I ended up marking the adjustment or the alignment section here, so that way when I put back or put in the new toe link, adjustable toe link, at least this lines up properly, and it'll give me a little bit of the proper alignment, so that way I can drive to the alignment shop. All right, so I took the nut off with the impact gun. Now I have the ball joint separator in there. So this popped out, but I think what I should have done was loosen that first, so that way at least it can swing down, because it had a lot of pressure from the hub holding it up and wouldn't allow it to come down. But it did pop off eventually, but it was a pretty big pop. Got the nut out and just pulled out the washer, and you'll notice that there's a little groove here, and there's a groove inside the bolt as well. But yeah, just turn the bolt down a little bit, get it out of the way, and then pull this unit out. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and align my new link here and measure out the distance as close as possible, and then I'll install it. So I got the toe link in. This was really snug, so it gave me a little bit of trouble putting it in there, and I somewhat lined it up with the markings that I had. Not perfect, but like I said, just good enough to get me to the alignment shop so they can do their job. But yeah, other than trying to put this in here, which was really tight, everything else kind of fit in perfectly. And I'm gonna go and tighten this up and then put in the dog bones and then work on the strut. Okay, the new shock is in, and one thing I want to make note of is, or you want to make note of, is make sure this little flap here is on the outside as you are lifting up the carrier. This basically keeps the mount from spinning. Anyway, I'm gonna crank it up and then make sure the holes line up. All right, so basically measuring out the dog bones, obviously using the old one and also the bolt to make sure the measurement's correct. And then I will install them once I have both of them measured out correctly. All right, the camber control arms or dog bones are measured out correctly or to the OEM size, and installing it in the back was fairly easy, but in the front was a little bit more difficult, and it has to be at a slight angle, as you can see, and I'm using the jack to get it in place. Yeah, I gotta use two hands. So they're both in, not tightened yet, definitely loose, so that way in the event I have to make some adjustments, but having a floor jack definitely helped. And while you're installing the second dog bone, or even the first one, keep in mind, if you hadn't tightened this yet, which I don't recommend, it's gonna pop out. So make sure you align everything at the same time as you're trying to align this. You're trying to align this into the holes up here. But yeah, just take your time, and once it's in, all you have to do is tighten it. So everything is in now, and it's super cool to see it like that. And I finished it off by tightening the 3 nuts up there. But yeah, everything's tightened, and except the sway bar, of course, because I'm gonna work on the driver's side. But probably in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna remove and replace the lower control arm over here, and then this control arm as well. And then I'm gonna do that for the front. And the last thing I have to do on this side is remove this stupid spacer, because it's held in by the original lugs and then some nuts. And then I'm gonna replace the brakes right now because they're really worn down.